You're listening to the Boomtime Digital Marketing Podcast. For over 50 episodes, Boomtime has been the professional source for marketing information and inspiration. For more articles and episodes, visit us at boomtime.com and be sure to subscribe to the Digital Marketing Podcast on your iPhone or Android device to listen on the go. Now, here's your host, JP Clement.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. This is JP Clement. I'm the CEO of Boomtime. We are a digital marketing agency with a twist. Today we are going a little bit deeper into our digital marketing tools that we use at Boomtime, but that are pretty typical to other agencies as well. And the subject of today's podcast is going to be web design versus graphic design. And to walk us through all of that, which is going to be really fun, we have Alfonso Barreiro, who is our VP of Operations, but started at Boomtime as a graphic designer and also, I think, web designer, if I remember. That was way before my time. But so Alf is going to walk us through the differences between graphic design and web design, and then talk a little bit more about web design specifically, because this is what we're concerned with at Boomtime. Digital marketing and web design is a big part of that. So Alf, it's all yours.
Thank you, JP. While you mentioned that I am the VP of Ops now, I've been involved with graphic design over 30 years, and web design probably 20 years, and seen quite an amazing evolution in both fields, especially web design. Both of these have a great understanding of graphics, typography, color theory, and other design principles, but how they apply these principles is different. Let me start with graphic design. So graphic design is foundational. It's where it all started. It's in the physical world. It's primarily print and has been for the longest time. That's evolved over time, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But the experience you have with graphic design is usually static, and it's progressive and linear. So just think of a magazine. You're looking at an ad or an article, and then you're going to the next page and the next page as you're progressing through that experience. But in general, it's static. Like I mentioned, magazines, it has various mediums from magazines, newspapers, books, banners, billboards, even buildings. While I mentioned that it's in the physical world now, and especially the last decade and a half, it's moved into the digital world, where graphic designers are creating digital banners, email graphics, social media graphics, infographics, and a lot of website graphics, which kind of correlates to where we're going with all this. Graphic design it creates, it uses these elements to communicate visually an idea, and it does this by combining graphics and illustrations, photos, logos, typography, and layout. These assets can be used for web design, which we'll talk about as well. So while they create for static presentations, they also create assets that we're able to use for web design. So what differentiates web design from graphic design? While graphic design is in the physical world, web and the digital world, web design is only in the digital world. So think websites. So once you create a graphic in the physical world, and once it's approved, you're done. It's complete. It's out there in the world. When you do website design, that's an ongoing process. And this is informed by analytics, A/B testing, user feedback, and client feedback. And especially with a lot of the technology advancing, there's many touch points where you have to continue to work on these different, on the websites, improve them, really look at what you're putting out there for your clients.
Alf, I just want to ask you a quick question here. So when you say it's a continuous process, I mean, can you define that a little bit better? Because I mean, the digital world in terms of graphic design and web design doesn't evolve. I mean, it evolves fast, and it's evolved very fast. But what would you say is like the typical cycle of refresh and everything for web design, for instance?
For web design, so I think the typical cycle of refresh is probably every 2 to 3 years. There's a lot of advancements. Not only advancement, there's a lot of design trends that happen fairly frequently on a 6 months to yearly basis, where certain things are coming out as design trends that people are really resonating with. And that's something to consider into either tweaking your site, updating sites. There's different technologies which make things faster. Before video was probably more of an issue to have on sites, but now with the technologies, with the devices we have, with the frameworks of how you build websites, you can have a lot more videos, which is a design trend that people are gravitating towards as you're sharing your websites.
Okay, so sorry I hope I'm not taking on a tangent here, but what kind of design trends, for instance, have you noticed in the past, let's say, couple of years that have really changed the way we think about web design?
Well, one probably big one is how the use of fonts and typography and fonts and how you use them on a website, because devices from monitors to phones to tablets have increased in how they display and how the quality of what they display. You're able to use a much more variety of fonts, which we'll talk about. But you use cleaner fonts. You're able to use fonts that scale down to phones where you maintain the readability, but it's important that, or the design trend is to do very clean, a lot of white space. Let the layout lead the client throughout the journey and we'll talk about customer journey and all that, but a clean layout with a good set of fonts, and we'll talk about that because clients might have certain fonts that we have to take into consideration when we do websites. Much more lately, especially now, much more use of video. Video has become a big, it's become important in how you tell your story. But when you consider videos for websites, you want to consider shorter videos, probably a minute and a half is where you have the attention of a person. That also kind of correlates with what's on the page. So they can either, as they see the video, or get more information as they kind of work through the site. Sorry,
it was a bit cutting me off here, but another thing I've noticed, because I've been doing digital marketing since 1998, so a long time, and I've seen all kinds of things in website design too, but it's not really my focus. But still, I've noticed that something that actually, as a user, has been kind of striking for me in the past few years is homepages tend to be incredibly long.
Yes.
You have to scroll. I mean, you can scroll for minutes. Is that something that's moving away? We're moving away from, you think? Because back in the days when we were all on dial-up modems, I mean, you probably don't remember that, but those pages, the homepage had to be really simple, really clean. Just get you to make sure you wouldn't move away and it wouldn't take too long to load and all of that. And today it seems like we're so far away from that. I mean, do you see that trend as continuing or staying, or is it something due to fad?
So let me talk a little bit about that. So as you said, back in the day, we had very short, small home pages. But with the advent of mobile phones and how people interacted with websites, they would go in and they would start scrolling, say the thumb up, and just moving through a page. And that, I think, translated to how we design for desktop and for other mediums, where we created these, people were used to scrolling. So scrolling didn't become, before, in the past, above the fold, so I'm mentioning a term, above the fold, which comes from the newspaper days when they came folded. So what they interacted with first was most critical. And that's still critical. What they see first is important, but the above the folds kind of gone away, where people are used to scrolling because the technologies that we have for frameworks to create the site servers, caching, all sorts of things, you're able to create longer home pages where you can put a lot more information. Again, you gotta balance that, because you want to take people on a journey, and usually the journey, it doesn't go straight down the page. You might want to take them to a different part of the page. You might want to take them to a call to action where they interact with a form, where they make a phone call. So I think there's a balance with that. You don't want to get stuck in a long page. I think also putting everything on a homepage becomes overwhelming, where again, you're thinking of customer journey. you want to lead them to certain things. I think the trend when it became more accessible to be able to do that because of technology, people started, it's like any pendulum. I think they became really long. But again, you still have to consider load time with that. You can only do so much with caching and stuff like that. So you want to find a balance with that. I think it's probably going slightly away as new design trends come in, obviously. But I think because the focus again needs to be on where you're leading the user to. And again, it's not necessarily down the page, it's to certain pages, it's to certain actions that might start not being there as much.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I remember the days of above the fold, which was everything back when your screens were like 640 by 480 or something like that, which is not the size of a good cell phone, mobile phone. So yeah, and it's important. I think you mentioned something that really resonated with me, because I think people might not realize that typically in overall about over 50% of website browsing is done on a mobile phone. I think we passed the 50% mark a couple of years ago, and that's not the way. I mean, it's keep increasing very, very slowly, but it's so designing for mobile is almost just as important as designing for desktop.
It is. So you can imagine if you're scrolling along through a desktop page, how much longer that would be on a mobile experience. And with the mobile being over 50% now, most of the searches done in business to business now is probably 70%. They start in the mobile. They might bounce over to desktop, but they initially usually start in mobile. So it's important to consider that, especially again, load times, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That could be a big deterrent for people leaving your site when you don't really take that into account.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I've read some very interesting stats about that, so I'm sure you'll bring them up. Okay, sorry for the tangent.
No, love the tangent. Yeah, so one of the things that you need to consider when you're designing for the web is the UX and the user experience. So both of them consider the UI, which is the user interface. It's fairly straightforward in graphic. So take an example of the magazine. You have certain dimensions, and you could fit. The graphic designer has the freedom to fit everything and anything they can into that, considering that they have to make it well, do it well, but they have that understanding. The user interface, or more importantly, the user experience on a website is much more valuable, because while in graphic design, when we think print and stuff like that, it's static, like I mentioned. In website design, it's very interactive. And so you're leading them. You want them to go somewhere. You want them to click a link to go to a certain page. You want them to press a button. The experience, there's a lot to that experience, which is informed by many things. So a couple of things that I wanted to bring up is that a web designer has to consider. But even in our case, in our company, it's not just a web designer, but there's other stakeholders that are involved in that, because it takes a lot to create a really simple yet powerful experience for the user on a website. And so some of the things they have to consider that they could be informed by others is the personas, and who you want to come to your site. Who is that user that you want to share this information with? So it's really important to understand that, to research that, to really get to persona. It could be one persona, and it could be multiple personas that you need to consider. So that's one big consideration. Another one, and I mentioned that a few times already, is that customer journey. It's really understanding where you want to take them, what you want them to do. Are you selling something? So you want to get them to make a conversion on a buy, or if you're like us. So for us, we want to be really one of the things that we want to do is be really transparent in everything that we do, but especially our pricing. So people will come to our site, and one of the places we want to lead them is to the pricing page. And so they know this is what you're in for. This is what to expect from us if you want certain types of services, and we're upfront with it. We've noticed that that's a really important page for us, and I'll talk about that too. But understanding that journey, where do you want them to go, and what actions or thoughts you want them to do? The architecture, the overall architecture of the site is critical as well. Being informed by a sitemap, which you're really understanding all the different aspects of what you want to do, where you want them to go, what information you want to give out. It's really important to make it as involved as much as it can, but it has to be real simple. So that has to be really thought out well as well as you go. So there's a lot that goes up front as you're thinking of what this user experience is like, because some people might want to navigate through the menu bar, through the menu. Some people might want to navigate as they scroll down or jump to it. Some people might hit that homepage, see a hero, and be led to some other place. So all those things need to be thought out, the bigger architecture, because you don't want somebody to go into your website and get lost, because the moment they get lost, they're going to bounce. And so you don't want to do that. Another thing to consider up front is not just,
by the way, when you say people are listening to us, when you say they're going to bounce, it's not a colloquialism.
Sorry.
It's a technical term saying that someone that comes to a page and then doesn't go to a secondary page or a second page on the site and leaves the site, basically. That's called, in our world, that's called bouncing.
Yes. Thanks, JP. Yeah, I might use some more technical terms that JP needs to make more understandable. Another thing for the web designer, but also in that context, when I talk about web designer, they're working usually with a team, the strategist, the person that's involved with the client, the development team. So they're working with all these people. And so one of the things that we do up front, and I'll talk about how we manage projects too, or how important that is for web design and graphic design, but we create wireframes. And so this is just the basic understanding of how this site is each page is going to be laid out, what needs to be, what's most important, what needs to be at the beginning, where you're going and leading them to. And so we usually create various wireframes from the home page, internal pages, contact, pricing, as I mentioned before, team pages. We want to have, and we create in our structure various templates that we'll call those templates from these wireframes to create the different layouts that we do. Another thing to consider is content. So you've heard content is king. And obviously it is on a website, especially because content feeds not only to the user experience on what they're learning from you, what they need to understand, but also how they get to you. So it goes into SEO and how people actually get to the site and stuff like that. So content, it has great consideration that we put into it, but also even thinking that, and we do this in our team, especially, content also has to be thought of with the website layout, with the wireframes in mind. So, you can create a ton of great content and consider like an article that goes on for various paragraphs, but you can't put that on a web page if you're trying to lead them on a journey. So the content, how it's created, needs to be thought out in sections or so different messaging is happening throughout that experience. So content is another key factor in how we consider designing a website. Graphics and illustrations, motion graphics, video, all these need to be considered. The thing with graphics too is you can create a lot of amazing graphics and have them live in other places where you don't have the considerations. But when you think about a website, you have to consider how they size down, their load times, how they flow with the content. And so a web designer, as they're creating not only the wireframes, but as they're creating the layout, has to take that into consideration. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because layout's really critical. And I mentioned load times. That's a huge factor in everything that you do when you're creating. So you have these constraints, and you understand as a web designer that you have constraints. You can't put the biggest image with the greatest amount of graphics and stuff, and then put a bunch of them and consider, okay, this is going to work for the user. Because again, one of the things that is known is if they go to your website and it takes 3 seconds or longer to load, they're going to bounce. Like we said before, they're going to leave the page. They're not going to engage with that because, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is too. Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I just read those stats like not very long ago. They said like if it takes more than 3 seconds to load, whether it's on desktop or mobile, well, obviously harder on mobile to
Yes.
match those times because you know of the bandwidth
Yeah.
issue. But yeah, they say that people will leave the
Oh,
site
yeah.
before the page even loads. So it's critical. And also, if Google, I know now, tracks what they call page speed.
Yes.
It's their own term for it, and it's
Yep.
one word, and they track that, and that influences greatly how you rank in their SEO system.
Yeah, and going a little further on that, JP, what they look at mostly is the mobile experience and how that tracks. So you can have a great design on a desktop, and then when you go to mobile, it doesn't translate well in speeds and how it, well, mostly in speeds with Google, but also how it lays out for the, so that's a huge consideration. We always consider mobile friendly as we design. We're constantly looking at what the mobile version looks like, how fast it loads and stuff like that, because it's critical that mobile experience, especially as you mentioned with Google and their page ranking, because Google and their page ranking is where a lot of times people are going to do those searches, or most of the time on the web, and get to, and get to you. So that's a huge consideration for a web designer. So again, it's not just laying stuff out that looks nice, it's taking a lot into consideration. And I mentioned layout, and we mentioned layout at the beginning where we talk about the long form page of the home, the long form of the home page now that's been more popular in these last years. But so when we consider laying out a website or creating a website, we consider the layout of a home page, landing pages as well. And landing pages are where through some other entry, it could be like a LinkedIn thing or email marketing or some other way that you get them to a specific landing page where the call to action and what you want, that journey is right in that page. So we create those landing page templates. A couple of other important ones are case studies, pricing pages, and team pages. And I kind of mentioned them all together is because one of the things that's happening more and more now, especially with the plethora of options that people have when they go to deal with a business or a company, is they want to get a personal feel of the company. They want to have a relationship with that company or that brand, not just purchasing something. They want to know, yeah, I can trust these people. I want to engage with them. And so it's really important to think about team pages, your pricing page, if you add that to your case studies, because they want to know, okay, I see what you offer, but what have you done? So another thing to consider that we consider is the layout of the pages. And then we think about them as we want to create, as we're creating for the web developers, for the other parts of the team, that we're creating layouts that, especially for the homepage and what that's going to look like. And a lot of times the homepage looks different from the internal pages, but there has to be consistency. So that's important that there's good consistency between the homepage and the internal pages. But we usually create a homepage, we create internal pages that are specific to various parts of various things that the business would have to offer. Very important ones here are product and services pages. So they're coming to your site to engage with you probably for a product you have or services you have. So those pages are really important to really think out. Another thing is pricing pages, which can come off those products and services pages where if we deem it important to really be transparent with our pricing so they know what they're dealing with. But those are important as well. And I want to mention team pages because not only do they want to engage or buy a product or a service, but they want to know who they're doing that with and who they want to have a relationship with this company because they have so many options and so many things that they can do now. Trust is important. And so understanding who you're dealing with is really critical. So we deem those pages to be really important. Another set of pages that we also usually lay out is our landing pages. And these have that customer journey I've spoken of kind of baked in right into that page. So when they're being led from a LinkedIn post or email marketing, they come to this landing pages, the journey happens there, the call to action happens there. So it might be scheduling an appointment or downloading a reward or some type of incentive to get them to sign up for your newsletter or various things. So landing pages are very critical. They're becoming much more popular. And they have the look and feel of a website, but they're not tied into the website. They can be where you bounce them out, but really what we want to happen there, a well done landing page does everything that it needs to there, and gets some call to action, a call out of action from the user when they go there. So those are some of the layouts that we really deem, or I think are important as you're designing a website. Like I said, sorry.
So going back to landing pages, though, before we move on, I think it's also important to realize that, especially for companies that have multiple what we call verticals or personas, right? Very critical, because it's very hard for a homepage to talk to 3 or 4 very different people in very different industries, right? So if you have that, landing pages become really important to be able to really push people to exactly the location that they need to be on. And as you said, the whole customer journey should be encapsulated in those pages. So, I mean, actually, if I look at the bouncing rate off of the landing page, I would be like, even if it's high, it doesn't really matter, because you should be doing the job on that page, and that's it.
Absolutely, yeah. And another thing for landing pages, as you could do analytics on anything on a website, again, as you're looking at the different personas, you want to make sure that you're understanding what you're creating these landing pages that really speak to those specific personas. And so through analytics, we can understand that more on what that, like you mentioned, the bounce rates and stuff like that, or the engagement, better yet, the engagement of clicking a button or making a phone call or scheduling an appointment and stuff like that. Again, like I said, web design is very interactive. And it's really important to think a lot of things out beforehand to make that experience very simple for them to interact with what you want them, where you want them to go, and what you want them to do.
Yeah, it's really a case of managing complexity, right? Because, I mean, as we just described, we've already talked about a lot of different things, right? And I know we're going to talk about it way more, but it might be a little bit overwhelming, right, to people listening to us. But this is why, building a website is not an undertaking that you should take lightly. I mean, it's complicated. It could literally make or break your business. And so, all these things have to be thought about and really processed to make sure that your website is going to be taking all these different moving parts, right? And all these different thoughts and ideas and goals and so on, and like make them into something that's pleasant, easy to follow, consistently designed, and all of that. So you get, as you said, the website visitors to do exactly what you want them to do.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm talking, and I am going to get probably a little bit more overwhelming at times because I'm going to share a lot. But one of the things that I did want to mention that made you, when you were talking, made me think is, this is all tied into a bigger picture for the client, in that these are their marketing efforts and what goes into it and how it has to really seamlessly go with the other aspects of marketing that they're using, be it email campaigns, be it LinkedIn campaigns. Everything has to flow together, and it has to be considered in that you're bringing people from various areas to this place where they hopefully some action will be taken when you bring them into the site. One of the things I wanted to mention, sorry, go ahead.
And you have to design for these people not only coming from different places, but being a different part of the funnel, right? Or in different parts of the funnel journey with you as a company.
Absolutely. One of the things I just wanted to mention quickly was, in graphic design, so you mentioned management, but like really managing these projects in graphic design, you think of how you manage it as a waterfall, where you get a waterfall planning, where you get all these assets up front. You kind of iterate a little bit, but you create, and then you're approved and you're done. With website design, there's much more of an agile planning, and we do that with a lot of other stuff besides our website design, but very much so, where there's a lot of back and forth iteration, understanding what needs to be tweaked, improved, getting feedback from the client at various stages, making informed decisions from the information you're gathering as you're going through the planning, as opposed to getting everything up front, because that's a challenge with a lot of clients getting it. And I'll talk a little bit about that in getting client assets and stuff like that. Actually, I'll talk about it now. So like, when you think about getting client assets for a website, a lot of times clients might have a lot of stuff and then they might not. They might have a logo, they might have their typography, their color palette. They might have content that they might have a lot of content, but as they think out a website, as they work with us and they think out their marketing, they haven't thought marketing as much into it. So a lot of content has to be revised or created as you're going through that process. But even like with brand guidelines, so say a client has brand guidelines that they have a color palette, they have typography, they have all these things, but if they haven't thought out the web part of it, they might just have colors that are CYMK that are meant for print, which are very consistent, but doesn't work for the website. So that we might have to work on the RGB. And not all CYMK translates to RGB specifically. So you might have to take that into consideration and get something that's fairly close. With typography, that's a whole different world where they might have a set of fonts that are fantastic. They look great, but they won't work for the web. They're not web safe. And so we have to, there's many times where we have to do font matching where this was a lot harder in the past. There was only a few set of fonts that you could use to be web safe. And when I mention web safe, it means that it works across multiple browsers. It works across multiple devices. As devices technology has improved, as monitors have improved, as browsers have improved, this has become easier. Now you have things like Google Font or Adobe Fonts, where you have a lot more options to work with a lot more different fonts or to match client fonts to really make that experience that if you can't do it one for one, from print and all the stuff they have there to web, you're close, and it's important to stay with that brand identity. So when they're interacting with a magazine article or a business card and they hit the website, there's that same consistent look and feel. But that has to be taken into consideration. If they don't have brand guidelines, which we've had many clients that don't, they might have a logo and a font, and so you have to kind of flow off that logo, font, and maybe fonts and some colors. You kind of have to flow the whole design of the logo, the feel you're getting from the logo, the fonts. We can also do font pairings, which is really important because a lot of the stuff you deal with on a website is you have headings and then you have some information, some copy and then you go to another section. And so it's really important that those fonts match, that they're readable. And when I speak about readable too, some fonts that might look great on print and look great on your desktop, and you go to the mobile experience, they become unreadable. Again, this has become this has become better throughout time because browser technology has improved, monitors and phones, just the quality that they have, you can do a lot more with that, but you still have to consider that they might not have any images. And that's a challenge. So we use stock images. We also create illustrations and stuff. Those are things to consider as you're dealing in this web design, is like you might not get a lot of these assets up front. That might be an iterative process that you're working with the customer.
So going back to the fonts though, then are you saying that the days of Times New Roman, Arial, and Comic Sans are gone?
Well, Common Sense should have always been gone, but yes, the other ones for sure. You do, and a web designer and creating a website correctly, you do have fallbacks. You create font families. So you want to get as much out there as possible consistently, but you also want to consider there's a lot of different browsers, there's a lot of different operating systems, there's a lot of different devices. But yes, those days in general are gone. There's a lot of fonts that you could use through Google Fonts, which will serve the font to the website. Adobe Fonts, there's other different ways you could do that. But yeah, those days are gone. You can really keep brand identity and really have great font pairings and fonts. So another design trend, as I mentioned before, that typography is so important, and creating sometimes big typography that looks good, having readable typography is very critical to that. So yes, so to answer your question, those days are gone.
Okay, no, I'm a big typography fan. So, and I also like that new trend of like matching sans serif and serif fonts on one website for different things. I think that's what we do for Boomtime, right? We have a serif header font, and then we have our body copy is sans serif.
Yeah, so a lot of times in print, you had the serif font, which when you think of serif, it had the little things at the ends of the fonts and stuff like that. And then sans serif is a very clean font. Think
Arial.
Arial is the most, yes, of course, Arial, very clean font. So for the longest time, you had mostly sans serif fonts throughout most websites because, again, they're easy. They're very serif fonts, very hard to read, especially in the mobile experience.
Yeah.
But because devices technology, now you have that option now to have sans serif with serif, and again, that's a skill set that's really important to be able to match that well. So it's readable, but it's also, it bounces, it makes it lively, it engages you, that header font engages you, and then you want to read more. And so that's really important. Okay. Yeah, on that one, I did want to jump into layout a little bit more.
Okay.
All right, fantastic. So layout is so important in any design, right? In a magazine, from a magazine to a website, but there's so much more to consider when you're designing for layout. So the first one I want to talk about is creating layouts that are responsive. And we talked about mobile friendly. There's also mobile first. Well, you got to consider the mobile phone as primary as much as you're creating that desktop experience. So layout has to be able to respond well, where things move around, where things still space correctly, where it's readable on, and you would think in the past it was just like from a desktop version to a mobile version. But now, even with monitors and how much they've become less expensive and way better, now we have to even consider large formats when you consider. So people are seeing things at really big settings up to tiny phones. And so you have to create responsive websites that really flow with whatever device you're working on, be it a tablet, a phone, a desktop. At some point, watches will probably come into play there as well. But yeah, so responsive is really important. Spacing and how you lay out a site is really important to consider as well. I always was of the adage, and I still have the adage, that white space is good. It's good to let things breathe. It's good to let the images and the copy or the text like flow and have some space, because you're leading him through a journey. You're not just trying to get everything done in one place. And so it needs to be pleasing. It needs to be easy to read, to look at, and to go through. So spacing is really important when you're considering design of websites.
And white space, also called negative space, right? It's
negative space. Yeah, it doesn't have to be white. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, for sure.
You can have a black background and still some.
Correct. Yeah, you're thinking that negative space, that space that the image doesn't live in, the font, but it's as important as where those things in. And talking about images, again, you have to consider that and now it's become like you said, things have become better. Servers are conserve things up faster. Caching has taken it, but you still have to consider images and what you're putting on a site. Not only how it lays out with the copy or the rest of the stuff on the site, but also the size of it and how long it takes to download. How long it takes to download on a mobile experience as well as a desktop experience. And so the web designer has to take into consideration. Sometimes they get assets from a graphic designer with these amazing images that are too big and take too long, so they have to bring them down. The advantage they have, one of the advantages that again, they're creating for RGB, so there's a little bit more forgiveness as you compress images down. But again, there's a fine line between quality and how fast they load and stuff like that. Again, the layout, and we've talked about customer journey, but the layout, how you lay things out and how that leads them on their journey is very important to consider. And then scrolling and moving to other pages. So scrolling, we mentioned the homepage being long, and websites, as you've used mobile, people are just used to flicking that thumb, and that's become much more of an experience on desktops and stuff like that. So as you lay stuff out, you have to consider what's primary, what's secondary, what really is important on a page, but also how they interact with one another, because people will scroll. That's just a natural inclination of a user nowadays. As much as they want to jump straight out to something, they'll probably scroll. So it depends how you lay out the customer journey. But scrolling is something you don't have to consider in the print world, because nothing's everything's static. So that's something to really consider.
When you talk about scrolling, you're talking about vertical scrolling, right?
Yes.
What I know, except for some apps, there's very little horizontal scrolling where you go like this as opposed to go like this, right?
Yes, yeah, up and down for sure. You don't want to go left and right. There was a time when there's a little bit of design trend to go right and left, but people are used to going. Again, it's that phone experience. It's that portrait phone experience where you're going up and down. So that's translated to how you lay out stuff for a desktop and a phone. You're taking those into consideration. We talked about that, you're creating for monitors, you're creating for mobile, you're creating for tablets. So you have to have that in mind as you create your sites. It's easy to response down to tablets because again, tablets and the technology behind tablets has improved, the quality has improved. So there's less to take into account, but you still have to consider that as well and with those. But mobile is the big one where again, you have to consider that it has to be a good experience. It has to be a great experience, a simple experience for them to be on mobile. So that medium is also something that's constantly being considered as you're crafting a website. All right, so now I want to jump to scale and ratio. And again, you have to consider all this. You have to consider things for print and stuff like that, but for a website, scale and ratio are really critical when you're doing responsive design. The huge thing I mentioned was fonts and how you create how you use fonts when you lay out a website for a desktop. You have to consider how they flow down to mobile and are they readable? Are they still readable? And that's a big, again, it's become better because of the technology and are much more access to fonts. But again, it's something that has to be highly considered. And so you might lay out a font on a website a certain size, and then you create it on the mobile through CSS and HTML. So there's another thing that's a difference between graphic designers and web designers is that there's a lot more technical knowledge that has to be understood to create for websites, to create websites. CSS and HTML are really important because they can respond, they're able, through code, you're able to respond. When you're on a mobile experience, this is the size I want the font or the buttons to lay out. The buttons might look fantastic on a desktop, but if they're that same size when you respond down, because they still fit in the screen, they might not look as well. So you have to really consider all those things. And that's something that's done through these languages, CSS, HTML, and other things like JavaScript or PHP. So that's another different aspect as the designer is thinking of scale and ratio, how those things lay out, they use coding quite a bit for that.
So a couple of questions here. Define CSS super quickly for the people who don't know what that is.
Yeah. So that's cascading style sheets. So those are it's code that lives in the back end of the website that tells you an attribute to a certain thing. So heading fonts on a desktop experience, depending on the resolution of the desktop, I want them at 32 pixels. When you go to the mobile experience, the CSS, the cascading style sheet, tells the mobile experience to put that font out at 12 points, 12 pixels. So there's code, basically intelligent code that lets you know with these sheets, this is how I want the sites to look in various devices. Okay. This is how I want the colors to flow throughout the website. So for buttons, I want them to be red, and all those attributes go across the website.
Yeah. And HTML, I'm going to try to show off for a second here.
Go ahead.
Hypertext markup language.
Yeah.
Which is the language of the web, basically.
It's the language of the web. Yeah. If you look, and it's fairly straightforward. You have header section, the head section, the body section where everything lives. And inside of that, you have different places where the layout is created, where the images are called from, so it's basically the language of the web. That was a great way to put it. Cascading style sheets let you design the layouts of how that web, and by changing just certain small attributes in the cascading style sheets, you can change quite a bit on design, which is really powerful. For us, our tool stack, so we use all these things, and you could design websites in all sorts of tool stacks and all sorts of things. We've landed on WordPress because it's an industry standard, but there's also other reasons why we use WordPress. We have a page builder, Elementor, which when we create our layouts, we create templates in those, which are web developers can then fill out, create all the other pages from that. But we also use Elementor in WordPress because then it allows others that don't have the web design, web development expertise to be able to engage with those sites, to update them, to be able to update the different pages. And it's very, very simple, straightforward. We even have some clients which update their pages and stuff because of the way we've our tool stack to create that. We also tie into various sources through APIs. And again, we do all this, and we've decided to land in this tool stack to be able to create fast, efficient websites that the coding is very clean, which is very critical for Google and page speeds and all that stuff, but also for that experience of maintaining, updating, and all that to be as straightforward and as scalable as possible. So that's I just wanted to kind of talk about those as we talked about language to tool stack.
And so WordPress, I can't remember the numbers, but by far the largest CMS content management system in the world, right? I mean,
in the world,
millions and millions and millions of sites, and or probably also thousands, if not millions, of what we call plugins, right? Which are other companies creating things for WordPress websites that, you know, can be free, can be paid for, that you can plug into like an e-commerce solution, right? Or things like that, right?
Yes, so it gives you the power to expand. Yeah. Now you have to be careful. With great power comes great responsibility. As we create our websites, we've landed on safe plugins. You know, these are plugins that have been vetted. That security is a big issue, and I haven't talked about that with websites. So we make sure that the plugins that we use, while it gives us, as you said, a lot of other functionality and stuff, that we're very careful in what we use and select, because we want to make sure they're secure, that they're updated, that they have a big user base. And so we take that into account as we do that. And all that, as you add more of this stuff, it takes in, you have to consider updating and maintaining these sites. So again, the ongoing process of not so much web design, but web development, just maintaining a website, is you have to maintain these plugins, the framework of WordPress and Elementor, because the web has security issues that are constantly being brought up. And so constantly all these things that we use are being updated. And that's part of the ongoing maintenance of a website that you don't have to think about when you create a magazine spread or a billboard or something like that.
Exactly.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about, it's fairly obvious. When you do graphic design, typically the information spreads out through sales, and printings, postings, deliveries, as other forms of marketing communication. Conversely, the dissemination of that information via the website is driven directly back by the traffic to the site that the visitors search for. And so you can engage with that information. So again, thinking of marketing too, is they go hand in hand, where you do all this other type of marketing, email marketing, social media marketing, and then you're bringing them back to this pillar, this important place where everything kind of lands, and you want the user to engage, but also then user to do some action from. So the website is core on how the information spreads, and then how it comes back to how they engage with it. And, you know, so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I remember that a few years ago, well, probably 10 years ago, when social media started becoming big, and people started to ask agencies, and agencies I was either part of or had started myself, they were all, a question that I used to get all the time was, do I need a website now that I can have a Facebook page or an Instagram account or a Twitter feed and things like that? And the answer was always yes, because you own it, you control it, you can do whatever you want with it, pretty much. And you do not, own your Facebook page, or you do not own your Instagram account. Instagram, Facebook, in this case, do. So yeah, I think that thinking has kind of disappeared a little bit, and I think most people now realize that your website is, as you call it, a critical pillar of your digital marketing and digital presence.
Why people will definitely engage you in these social media places. And that's important. You build brand and you build trust and all that stuff. They're going to end up one way or another coming back to your website because they want to either find out more about your products and services, about you, about the company itself, and who they're dealing with, and how that comes across and how you're presenting that. So again, it's the website. Everyone needs to have a website. Every business needs to have a website for sure. So I wanted to talk about just a little bit about visual theory in the aspect. So when a user comes to a website, and they engage it, I think one of the adages that I know that I've heard before is don't make me think. So a user wants to land there and be led. And we talked about that with the customer experience. When they have to start thinking about what the next step is, that's usually, again, when they either disengage or bounce or stuff. So there's a lot to get to creating that simplicity or that elegance of leading them to somewhere, but it's not very easy to do. It takes a lot of this other stuff going hand in hand to get to that place where the user who comes in from an organic search or a pay-per-click or an email or social media, they get there, they're already engaged and they want to be led somewhere. So that's really important for not only the web designer to consider, but all the different stakeholders that are working with the web designer, from the strategist to the web developer to the graphic designer.
Another thing I think to me that's been super important, and I think you probably heard me say it several times, is consistency. I mean, it goes with don't make me think, right? If suddenly your internal page is very different in terms of the layout and the colors and the graphics and the typefaces from the buttons, the calls to action might be different too from your homepage, for instance, or another page. People get confused, right? And you're asking them to think way too much and to basically learn something as they go, which is not something that they want to do and don't have the time, the energy, or the desire to do. So to me, don't make me think also is what you talked about, but I think also the consistency is pretty critical.
Yeah, especially for the consistency in everything you do, but your brand identity. Again, there's so many brands out there and so many things that they have to trust that they're dealing with you and that you're consistent across the board, because that goes out to other aspects of what they deal with you with. I want to talk about SEO and analytics. So Google Analytics and other tools give great feedback, critical feedback on websites, and so you can know what needs to be implemented to improve them. And that's that ongoing process that you kind of asked me about a little bit. It's not just changing and iterating designs or layouts and stuff like that in various cycles, but you have to look at some of the information that the analytics can bring back are bounce rates. So where are they bouncing? Are they going to your homepage and they're bouncing right away? Are they scrolling down and getting to and bouncing? Are they jumping to another page? So it's really important because it informs you what do you need to focus on to improve what's working. Duration of stay is another big one. And this goes back and forth, so how long are they staying on not only the page, the site, but the individual pages? How are they engaging with that information? And again, you can make tweaks, you can improve. And that not only goes for the web designer, but the team as they work through it. What keywords are using that are working for them to come in? What are they searching for when they think about whatever it is they need to think about to come to your site? Where are those sources coming from? It could be organic searches, Google searches. It could be from email marketing. So as you tie in other marketing aspects, is that email marketing effectively driving them to landing pages on your site, to your site? If that's the action that you want them to take. Are they engaging you on LinkedIn? Are you having conversations? And then is that conversation leading to them coming to the site? And so all this information is there and it needs to be analyzed and iterated upon. Errors. Any kind of errors that happen on a site, there's not too many errors you can have on a print. You might have some kind of misspelling or some kind of issue. On a site, there's so much to it that there could be, or the way something's served up from the server, there could be errors that need to be addressed. And all that, again, that iterative process that you can make improvements upon.
One thing here, and I don't want to get us down the SEO rabbit hole because it is a gigantic rabbit hole and it can be really complicated and really boring. But I'm glad you're talking about SEO and analytics in general, because there's a lot of analytics that are not directly related to SEO that can really tell you a lot about what's working from a design standpoint and what's not working. But SEO is really has two components. One is the what we call on-page SEO. It's like to really in a general way. So on-page SEO is what we talked about. Is like what keywords are in the copy, right? And a bunch of other things related to content and design and pure design. And then there is like technical SEO, which it gets incredibly complicated. Like Google has a set of requirements and criteria that they use. We talked about the page speed, right? How fast does a page load? But also they look at all kinds of other very, very technical things that have a huge impact on your SEO and how your page ranks or your pages rank.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we can go into
we can go into all of it, but all of it has to be taken into account. I mean, when you talk
all
about
of that has to be taken into account.
There's all the content and graphic portion of it that has an impact on SEO. And because from what we talked about, there is also all the technical aspects of things that has a gigantic impact on and all that is part of web design and development.
All part of that is of web design, and so I'll touch on one, not to go too far into it, but like you can create a wonderful website with amazing graphics and content and all that, and then if you don't take into account that you have to actually give the graphics titles, alt tags, what is considered alt tags, you can actually pay for that in your rankings, because you have to consider accessibility, you have to consider other things and how they engage with your site and stuff like that. So that's something that, again, there's a lot of different things that go into this SEO as you're developing websites and how they're ranked, but also not just for the rankings, but also considering different types of users and how they'll be able to engage with your site. So yeah, that's another, that could be a whole nother podcast
but this is something we pay a lot of
yes
to, is the analytics behind everything we do in digital marketing, but not forgetting that web design and website development and design and development should be very much driven by data too. And so, that's something we definitely pay a lot of attention to. And I think needs to be mentioned because people might think about it as very creative, as you mentioned, like design a beautiful site that works really well, but suddenly nobody comes to it because SEO is terrible. So all these things have to be taken into account.
So the SEO, so they nobody comes to it. So you have to get traffic there for sure.
It's definitely a case of just building it doesn't mean they will come.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we talked, that's a great point, JP. So we talked a lot about when they're there, all the different things that are involved in that, but to get them there is as important. And that's why you have to tie in various forms of marketing outside of that, email marketing, pay-per-clicks, social media, especially in business, LinkedIn, and what you create there, the relationships and the conversations you have there. Again, creating all this traffic back to the place that you want to kind of showcase who you are and what you have to offer and stuff like that. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is a little bit of our secret sauce, and I've talked a little bit about that, like with the WordPress and Elementor, but really it's the teams that are involved in kind of putting all this together and how they interact and how they interact and what they bring to the table. When you're thinking of stakeholders for a graphic designer, it could be the client, and it could be a marketer or a marketing strategist, as we call them, that's dealing with the client, and that graphic designer. And then you're getting all the assets, you're creating the whatever the ad is or whatever the graphic is, and you're pretty much done. Web designers, stakeholders are quite a bit more when done well, because again, there's a lot to it to create something that's really simple and powerful, that really doesn't make the user think and really leads them to where they want to go. So again, you have the client, obviously. You have the marketing strategist that we call them, or a marketer, and they deal with the client. They really learn who the client is, what they have to offer, start building those personas, that customer journey, kind of putting all that together understanding what they wanted this, what they want to put out on their website and stuff like that. And then you also deal with the content developers. So they're creating the content, which again, that they could deal with the client who has content, or they understand what the client needs. They create briefs and they create content that's with the web in mind, especially. Again, like I said, you don't want to create long pages of content. You want to create sections. So they even working with the web designer and understanding, here's the sitemap. And sorry, here's the wireframe of what this web. And so, so I can fit a paragraph here, maybe a couple here, and really understand, have that mindset of web design as they're building out the content. So that's kind of one of our secret things, or secret sauce things that we have, because it's not easy to create. Creating content's one thing. Creating content with website in mind is a whole nother thing. Another stakeholder that the web designer has is the web developer. And so again, they're creating and crafting a lot of the stuff up front, layouts and templates that then a developer can get and flesh out the whole site, tie it into various things, from the plugins you mentioned to databases to all sorts, to APIs, to other CRMs, or various things that you want to tie into the website. That's where the web developer comes in. But they have to have that, not only that relationship with the web designer, but also some web design in mind. And so again, that's one of our secret kind of sauces, in that our web developers really have a lot of web design understanding in mind. Graphic, even to the point of graphic design, not as much, but to the point of that. And vice versa. Our web designers have knowledge into web development as well. And so I think that's really critical, to have teams that are not only synergetic, but kind of overlap a little bit, to really make that seamless transition from one stage to another in that development. And of course, the graphic designer also has to have that knowledge, or it's also beneficial for them to have, and ours do, have that knowledge of web design. Because again, you can create fantastic graphics or even illustrations, or bring up typography and font, and not understanding those things create much more tension, or create much more iterations that can bring to make the process a lot longer. So again, I think part of the secret sauce is having some insight and some knowledge into the other aspects of your stakeholders. And as they're working with our marketing strategist, the person that's engaging with the client, but also kind of working with the project, they're dealing with getting that information for the personas, the customer journeys, helping the information be informed with the wireframes that they work on together, and then getting this back to the clients at various stages is also part of the secret sauce. So we can iterate and get to approval stages as we go throughout the process of, as you see, there's much involved in creating a website. So as much as we can know that, yes, everyone's on the same page at this stage, now we move on to the next stage, and so forth, and so on and so forth, is a real important part of that secret sauce that we talk about. And so,
sorry, to reinforce that a little bit, I think it's you talking about something that's very critical, is that, it sounds, all of what you mentioned sounds incredibly complicated, right? There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different people involved, there are different skills involved. And it sounds kind of daunting, but what I think part of our secret sauce, is you started to talk about a little bit, is that we've processized all of that, and we know what needs to happen when we need to have a checkpoint with the client, when we need an approval, who gets involved from our team at what point, and all that has been really codified, which means that we can go through that process with all these moving parts, all these different people, and really make it as efficient as we possibly can. Which in turn turns into our ability to make sites for companies at a price that is very reasonable. Because again, with that complexity we're talking about, people are probably listening to us and saying, "Oh my God, how much does it cost to do one of these things then?" And the question, the answer is that a lot of agencies charge a lot more than we do, because, they tend to be more custom. They need to take, they don't have the necessary, probably the process in place. They may not also have all the different people in-house that you need to create a website, which we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of part of our secret sauce, in the sense that we can do a really beautiful WordPress website that works well, that ranks well on Google searches for a very reasonable price, which is our raison d'etre, right? For Boomtime, is to be able to be affordable for small and medium-sized businesses. And we spend a lot of time thinking about that and dealing with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned, but I just want to reiterate that, and that just, it doesn't come in a vacuum. In the aspect of the marketing part of that is also ties into all this stuff. As you think of the personas and the customer journey and all these things, the other marketing, and which we provide, from email marketing to social media marketing, to paper, all the different aspects, it's important, as you see, because there's so many things involved, that it's consistent and that it has strategy in mind, that there's a reason why you're leading them to whatever actions you want them to lead to, engage you, buy your product, buy your services, and stuff like that. So yeah,
and all backed up by research and data and
yeah. All this, as I said, web design and basically marketing too. All this needs to be an ongoing process, because you're iterating off data. And you're understanding what's working, what's not working. How do we make things better? Where are they engaging? At what points? Where are they not? And all that stuff. So yeah, that all flows hand in hand.
Yeah, and it's not a static process, as you mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation, right? It's something that, okay, we build a website, but we have to keep changing it. We have to keep looking at the analytics to make sure that what we've been doing works. If it doesn't work, we need to change it and all that. So this is a constant process that our strategists get involved with our clients on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Alf, that was quite a bit of information. Thank you so much. For all the people who've been listening to this very end, thank you. And they can always come to boomtime.com. They can go find Alf directly, or myself, or our other people. As you can tell, we love to talk about those things, and we love to educate. That's one of our core values. So hopefully people learn something from this. And if you're really overwhelmed and daunted, just come and talk to us. We're happy to have one-on-one conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks, JP.
Alf.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Boomtime Digital Marketing Podcast. For more episodes and to learn more about us, check us out at boomtime.com.